Todd Howard recently sat down for an interview with IGN and discussed a variety of topics, to include Starfield. I made a short video covering some of the new details, but today I will be further speculating about 11 distinct elements Todd Howard mentioned will be included in Starfield and how these will ultimately affect the game that we will, at some point, get to play. There's a lot to talk about, so let's get started. So to start, I'll replay the clip where Todd Howard discusses the things that they're working on when it comes to fleshing out the game world of Starfield.
That it needs to be as fully fleshed out as to, how far in the future is it? What happened in all those years in between? What is the technology level? What do they eat? Where do they go? What do they know? How do they communicate? What are the races or places or people or creatures or this or that, and why? That's really what I mean, and have it be its own thing as opposed to that's Star Trek or that's Star Wars.
So
somebody looks at it and says, that's Starfield.
Yeah.
You can look at Fallout and say, that's Fallout.
This answer was in response to a question about what the tone of the game is, and how they can create a unique and fleshed out world for a game that Todd Howard wants to be the end-all be-all science fiction game we've all wanted to play. So we will talk about each of the points that Todd Howard brought up when discussing what the world of Starfield will include. First, one of the biggest clues as to the nature of Starfield is that Todd Howard starts his list with, quote, how far in the future the game is. To me, this clearly signifies that the game is set in our universe, specifically a future human civilization that has, or is going to, take to the stars. If this wasn't the case, there's absolutely no reason to even invoke time at all. There's a timeline for the Elder Scrolls series, but since it is wholly a theoretical fantasy creation, quote, when in time relative to our existence doesn't matter, nor would mentioning it even make any sense since there's no point of reference. Instead, what this really means is that the world that we live in, or at least a version of it, will progress to space travel at some point. Now, Bethesda could be creating an alternate timeline of the kind Fallout has, where the world of the 1950s persisted and technology changed and evolved in an entirely different way. Regardless, Starfield seems to be anchored in a version of the reality that would be familiar to us as either a future that we could expect to see or a timeline deviation similar to the world of Fallout. Second, Todd Howard says, quote, what happened in the time between, and this goes hand in hand with the first point, which was how far in the future the game takes place. The very genesis of this question implies a not insignificant passage of time. I would speculate we are talking many hundreds or even thousands of years into the future, which of course makes sense, since manned space travel of any kind outside of our solar system is something that would, in reality, be many hundreds of years in the future at a minimum. The quote, what happened part is a great source of speculation as well. That could mean a wide variety of potential events occurred in the time between now and when the game takes place. Some kind of extinction level event may have happened, overpopulation, maybe even population decline for some reason, or simply the passage of time and technological advancement. However, the way Howard says, quote, what happened, leads me to believe that there will be some kind of event, probably central to the story, that has forced us to leave Earth and our solar system and explore the galaxy. A need of resources, a new home, a threat of some kind, the list goes on. But I believe that there will be an impetus for us to leave and explore the stars. Third, Howard mentions what kind of technology is being used. The fact that he mentions this also reinforces the idea that the game is based on some kind of realistic science principles. If there's types of technology being used, and potentially backstory for that technology, then to me, that means that they are taking the idea of technology in general very seriously. It could also be important to the story. When discussing the tone of the game, Howard said that they teased the tone with the teaser trailer at their E3 2018 press conference. In that video, the spacecraft shown was something that you wouldn't typically see in most modern science fiction. It was more realistic, complete with solar panels, so it was rooted in scientific reality as a spacecraft that we would potentially use, at least for the time being. Technology could be a fundamental element of the game in some way, and how it is used, and by whom, could make a big difference when visiting other stars. The idea of space travel and visiting other civilizations could be a great way to introduce story elements that center around technological differences. If we are the civilization that has traveled to the home world or solar system of another civilization, then technological differences between us could be profound, which would lead to an interesting dichotomy as it relates to the story. After hearing Todd Howard mention technology, and thinking about it for a little while now, I think that it could be a central theme of the game in some way, which would make absolute sense if you think about it from a grounded or realistic perspective. Fourth, Todd Howard mentions, quote, "What do they eat?" And this could mean any number of interesting possibilities. The most likely is that food is in the game just as it is in Fallout and Elder Scrolls games, and it grants healing properties. No big deal, other than visiting other planets potentially opens your character up to new things that may or may not be harmful. Alternatively, if the game is going for a more realistic tone as we have surmised, there may be a survival element involved. Imagine charting a course for another solar system far away, and food, like fuel or water, is treated as a resource that you must have enough of in order to make the trip. Food may also be treated like it is in the Fallout 4 survival mode, where you must consistently eat and drink to survive. It is interesting that this makes his list. Fifth, Howard asks, quote, "Where do they go?" Meaning, in my opinion, humanity. Where is it that we are going out to explore? Are we exploring other solar systems close by, or other galaxies entirely? There's no shortage of hypothetical places to explore in the universe. So this is very, very broad, and of course, in a Bethesda Game Studios game, exploration is always an important central theme of the gameplay experience, and I assume that Starfield will be no different. Sixth, Todd Howard asks, quote, "What do they know?" And that is also insightful, if only to reinforce the idea that there may be a quest for knowledge in the game. Space exploration in Starfield could simply be to gain answers to questions. What happened was the second main question he had, so what do they know is a logical next step to take. If we are searching for answers and the answers are out there, another central theme of the game may be to do whatever it takes to find those answers. What we do not know is what are the questions that they need answers to. Is it linked with the survival of humanity? Who knows, but many of Bethesda's games have a central story theme centered around a mystery that you must solve, most recently in Fallout 4's story, where you look for answers as to where your son is and why he was taken. Skyrim's was why have the dragons returned? Fallout 3 asked you to find out why your father left the vault and where he went. Mysteries are typically a good way to tell a story if done correctly. Seventh, Todd asks, quote, "How do they communicate?" And this is another potentially big one. Finding a new civilization among the stars is exciting, but gaining knowledge is much more difficult if you cannot communicate with them. In a realistic setting, how do you solve for this? Is a part of the game centered around finding ways to communicate with faraway civilizations? Building your own Rosetta Stone for each one and thus unlocking new answers, uncovering new information, opening new quests, and gaining access to new locations? This could definitely be something for advanced civilizations that the player may discover. Eighth, Howard asks, what are the races? And this is very broad as well. Is he talking about races we can play as or races that we will encounter during the course of the game? Personally, I believe that it is the latter, because I believe the game will have us simply create a human character like in Fallout, and then we will be on our way. I can't see a way where we play as an alien species, but then again, it is definitely a possibility. Still, it is interesting to ponder. More likely, there will be a variety of other spacefaring civilizations we come across, and those are what Todd means when he speaks of races. Ninth, Todd Howard mentions, quote, "places," and by this, clearly, it is where we are exploring. This could broadly mean another solar system or galaxy, or more specifically, certain planets, moons, or objects simply floating in space. If you recall from my earlier video, What We Know About Starfield, there was a rumor we discussed that posited there would be 4 planets to explore, and each of them would be more or less the size of the world we explored in Skyrim. I think if this is true, this is what Todd Howard means by places. It really is one of the most interesting aspects of the game to me because I love exploration so much. I can only hope that these locations are rich in lore and have unique characteristics just like in other Bethesda games, just on a much larger scale. Even having the ability to explore other spaceships, like a derelict vessel floating in space and solving a localized mystery, or simply some good environmental storytelling makes exploration worthwhile. 10th, Howard spoke about, quote, "people," and this generally means us, right? Your crew, companions, your significant other, your boss, or the rest of humanity. Whatever the story is, there will be others involved and they will help shape the experience. Being a game set in space, I can't imagine traveling with a crew of others in service of whatever it is you are working toward or searching for. So this isn't necessarily news at all, but it reinforces the notion that it may not be a game where you're undertaking space exploration by yourself. We will see. The 11th and final element that Todd Howard mentioned was, quote, creatures, and this is where Bethesda may have some fun. Designing new animals, flora, fauna, or otherwise fantastical things that you'd potentially only see on another planet must be an amazing experience for a creative person. Not being bound by something of our world allows them to create creatures that make a game set in space much more engaging. If every location we visit reminds us of Earth, then what is the point of exploring space at all? One of the best ways to set a new location apart, other than exotic plants or topography, is by incorporating strange animals. The term creature is interesting though, because a lot of the enemies you fight in the Fallout series would more aptly be described that way, so this could simply be synonymous with enemies that we will fight in the game. It could also just be an all-encompassing term to describe everything we will come across over the course of the game as we explore and discover new locations. New creatures will help each location look and feel unique and distinct. Okay, so that about covers it for this video. I think that these elements were top of mind for Todd Howard because he's been working on them for the last several years while his team has been developing Starfield. The manner in which he rattled off all of these ways to flesh out a game world leads me to believe that he has spent considerable time talking about this internally, deliberating with his team as to what each of these means within the context of Starfield. If nothing else, it is just fun for us to speculate about. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to like and subscribe, maybe click that bell icon, and as always, thank you so much for watching.